Good morning, everybody. It is Sunday morning here on the Dynasty After Party. I am your host, Joshua Hudson. With me, as always, Mr. Joel Wirth as our Dynasty hot seat chair there that likes to go through and explain all this good stuff. On today's episode, we are continuing the Club Fantasies A Look Inside team preview branding here, and we're going to be previewing the Green Bay Packers, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Houston Texans to help you find all of the Dynasty gems and maybe a few sells that you might need to get out ahead of. So stay tuned. Welcome, everybody, to the Dynasty After Party here at Club Fantasy. I'm your host, Joshua Hudson. With me, as always, Mr. Joel Wirth. How you doing today, Joel?
Good. It's always a special edition of the after party when I get to talk about the Packers for 15 minutes. So looking forward to this one.
Yeah, right. I'm a little upset that I had to miss last week when we were talking about my Eagles, but
that's
good
true.
to have Sicoli back. You know, it felt like old times,
absolutely,
right?
For sure.
All right, as we mentioned in the intro, we're going to be talking Green Bay Packers, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Houston Texans. And by all means, anybody that's listening, please hit us up in the chat. You got any questions on these teams, players on the teams? Let's answer them. Let's talk about them, because that's what truly makes this show so much more fun, because nobody likes to hear just Joel and myself talk, I promise you. All right, before we get into all of the fun stuff, let's talk about our sponsor. We are brought to you by Dynasty Nerds. Club Fantasies recently set up a sponsorship or an affiliate deal, with Dynasty Nerds to save 15% on any of the memberships at Dynasty Nerds. They have everything from a trade calculator to film room. They have their Discord, Dynasty rankings, articles, you name it. They got it. It is all set up to help you dominate your Dynasty leagues the same way that we do the same thing. 15% off. Go to dynastynerds.com, enter promo code CLUBFANTASY. Save yourself that 15%. I'm telling you what, when it comes to scouting prospects, that film room is A1. It is what's up. And it's going to come in handy during college football season. I promise you that. So remember, dynastynerds.com, enter promo code CLUBFANTASY. Save yourself 15%. All right, Joel, the time is
Here we
coming.
go.
Are you ready, sir?
I am ready. Let's do it.
We are going to be talking all about the Green Bay Packers. They have got some interesting players here. And the reason I say interesting is because I can't think of another team in the NFL that has this many young prospects that look so eye-opening and appealing to dynasty managers. So let's start with the front office, because Brian Gutekunst has been under some fire. Took a little heat, especially initially with the Jordan Love pick and kind of how he handled the exodus of Aaron Rodgers. But going into 7th season, and then Matt LaFleur as the head coach play caller in their 6th season, maybe we were just impatient, because it feels like they've built something pretty damn good here. Okay. Got Jordan Love, 26. I love how you put impatiently waiting for an extension.
Let's go. Training camp starts tomorrow. First practice. Let's do it.
Like, they did go out and spend big money on a running back, Josh Jacobs, 26, 4 years, $48 million contract, which really is just a 1 year, $14 million deal when you really break it down. They did spend, I believe it was a 3rd round pick on rookie Marshawn Lloyd at USC. He's 23. Then comes all of the sexy prospects. They're wide receivers and tight ends. Christian Watson, 25, heading into his 3rd season. Romeo Doubs, 24, heading into his 3rd season. Then you have the second-year guys. Jaden Reed, 24. Dontavian Wicks, 23. Bo Melton, 25. And then getting into the tight ends, both of which are heading into their 2nd seasons. Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, both 24. All right, Joel. Let's start. Let me grab my banners here, because I did set these up. All right. Jordan Love. We saw the big breakout last year. Was one season enough for you and everyone else to believe that he is not only a top quarterback in the NFL, but potentially a top, tier 2, maybe even tier 1 quarterback in Dynasty.
It was for me. I mean, if
you were on him early last year. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I ended the Scott Fishbowl with the earliest Jordan Love pick, and that turned out pretty good. Yeah, I mean, if you look at what he did down the stretch last year over the last, 8 or 9 games, he had 18 touchdowns and 1 interception. I mean, he was literally the best quarterback in the league for fantasy and, real life football. I don't know what more he could have done. I mean, obviously there was some growing pains early in the season, but that was to be expected, especially with the kind of, you didn't have a Davante Adams, you didn't have, an elite receiver to kind of teach those guys the ropes. So you had, 2 second-year guys and, basically 3 third-year guys kind of manning down the ship. Christian Watson wasn't available early. So yeah, there was a lot going on that Luke Musgrave was running the wrong route, kind of famously. He was getting chewed out by LaFleur for running wrong routes. There was a lot going on that kind of didn't help him either. So, but once things settled down, he was, there's no way other to say it than he was elite. So yeah, I'm smashing refresh on Roto World, waiting for that extension update. It's going to be big money. I don't know what they're waiting for. I think it's probably in the guarantees, just because they have historically not I have no question or no doubt that he's going to get basically what Trevor Lawrence got. I said when the salary cap kind of escalated the way it did, I said he's getting 275, and that's exactly what Trevor Lawrence got. He was better over that stretch than Trevor Lawrence has ever been in his career, despite being the number 1 overall pick. So yeah, it's plenty enough for me. Dynasty wise, there's no reason not to have him ranked basically in a tier with Joe Burrow, CJ Stroud. They're basically kind of all the same guys.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I'm uncharacteristically high on Jordan Love in redraft this year. I think he's my QB4, QB5 when I did my projections. I have him over Stroud. I think I have him over Dak as well. And a lot of it boils down to the weapons on this team. We talk about this all the time. Like when you draft young quarterbacks, what are you putting around them? Whether it's offensive line, whether it's the weapons. They like Stroud got the offensive line early, right? That's what the Texans went out and did last year. They brought in the linemen, they signed all of them, and then they ended up getting hurt, which didn't help. Had a couple of good weapons, and then this year they said, all right, we got to bring in a couple of guys. They brought in Mixon, they brought in Diggs. We'll obviously get to the Texans here later. Packers, I think, still have a little bit of work to do on the offensive line, but the way that this offensive system works, I think, can mitigate some of those issues because it's an extension of McVay, right? And Shanahan. And those guys, they get rid of the ball quickly. And that's what Jordan Love really showed last year. When he came on towards the end of the year, like you said, 18 touchdowns, 1 interception, he was firing on all cylinders. Those guys were running the right routes. They were getting moving, getting to the place they needed to be. And he was making plays. And now you say, all right, what's the encore, right? Because that's going to be the big test. How does he do it again? Because, yes, these wide receivers are a year older, but they're still really young. There's not a guy on this team that has more than 3 years experience outside of Josh Jacobs, who they just brought in. So that, to me, is going to be the biggest factor in how this team ultimately lives up to expectations this year. I'm with you when it comes to Jordan Love's value. I'm right up there with, the Prescott, or excuse me, the Strouds and the Joe Burrows, because they're very similar types of players that don't offer a ton when it comes to rushing. And so much of their value is going to lie in, all right, is it over 4,000 passing yards? Is it over 32 touchdowns, right? That's what we want to see from these guys that don't have that rushing floor. Yeah, I'm so happy because I have a 1 quarterback league where I had Aaron Rodgers for a while, and I was like, all right, nobody drafted Jordan Love. You know what? Let me just stash him on a practice squad.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Love takes over last year, and Rodgers leaves, and I'm like, hey, I got 2 starting quarterbacks. Then Rodgers goes down after 4 snaps. I'm like, hey, I got 1 starting quarterback. And he led me to a championship, so it worked out just great.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my dynasty roster, Love is probably easily my most rostered, valuable player. I mean, I've got a ton of, low end guys on some teams, but and that's after 2020, I just stashed him because like 2020 wasn't that long ago, but it was a different environment especially in Superflex, right? There wasn't the kind of fanatical desire to get backup quarterback. Like Michael Penix this year was going, back into the first, early second, even though he really has no.
I got him in late second in one Superflex.
Yeah, in 2020, that was more the norm, that these guys who didn't have a path were going in the late second. So yeah, I just had I just stashed him there. Yeah, it cost me a roster spot for a couple of years, 3 years basically, but now it was kind of worth it. So
chef's kiss, baby. Let's go.
Exactly.
All right, moving on. Let's touch on these Packers wide receivers. And yes, the banner here says exactly what I needed to say, because we talk about how Jordan Love was elite last year. And there were some really good wide receivers. But no one really said, I'm taking the reins and I'm going all the way. This receiver room looks tailor-made for best ball. So when we're talking managed Dynasty leagues, I need the aspirin for this headache, Joel. So help me out here.
Can't, because I feel the exact same way. Yeah, I wrote the Dontavian Wicks article this week for the Club Fantasy Look Inside series, and yeah, I mean you nailed right on the head. I mean, this is best ball, just a ton of options for best ball, but none of these guys are going to be consistent producers for managed leagues. I mean, if you look at as good as Jaden Reed was last year, you look at the playoffs, like against the Dallas game, a game they put up 40 points offensively, 6 touchdowns, and Jaden Reed didn't have a touch. Christian Watson had 1 reception for 9 yards. So between the two of those guys, who are basically the two most valuable receivers heading into the season, they had 1 catch for 9 yards in a game that they put up 40 points offensively. So yeah, it's kind of scary that the weekly floor on these guys is all very low. And to make it worse, like I think LaFleur is just kind of licking his chops, waiting to get Kraft and Musgrave on the field at the same time and just kind of create mismatch issues for the defense. So yeah, so even a guy like Jaden Reed, who was really good last year and is a really good player, and I expect, if Watson's healthy, I expect their 2 receiver sets to be Watson and Dobbs. And I think there's going to be a lot of that, and there's going to be a lot of 12 personnel where they try to run. And if you stack the box, they'll use those guys down the seams, or just, try and go over the top with Watson and Dobbs. So I think it's really tough to start. Like, they're going to have, all these guys are going to have boom weeks, right? But it's going to be really tough to time those out.
So the one player that I want to kind of highlight specifically here, because I agree with everything you're saying, right? This is going to be a headache. You can look at all of the, the requisite target shares that, kind of eye pop when, like the big 3, Watson, Dobbs, and Reed are on the field, that heavily skew Watson. But just like you said, like it could very easily change week to week. 1 week could be a Watson week, one's a Reed week, one's a Dobbs week. But I think the biggest name here that I feel like people are really starting to buy into because of what he did down the stretch is Dontavian Wicks. And great article, go to clubfantasyffl.com, read Joel's piece on Dontavian Wicks. Where do you sit from a dynasty perspective on Wicks? Like, I understand, he's just, one piece of this pie that, ups and downs, et cetera, et cetera. But there are people buying him, saying that he's the wide receiver in this room that you want.
As much as I like him and as talented as I think he is, I think that's wrong. And that it's at his price, sure, because you can get him. Well, I don't know. I've gotten offers, like I stashed him a ton last year as well. Like, he was kind of the guy after the draft that nobody took.
I was taking him in like the 4th, 5th round of rookie draft.
If he didn't get drafted, he was like my first. Yeah. He was my first waiver wire pickup. So yeah, I've got a ton of him as well. So yeah, I've gotten kind of offers ranging from complete garbage to, like, why would I do that, to late seconds. But yeah, his value is all really contingent in that if Watson can't stay healthy for some reason, if Dobbs gets hurt, if like he can run kind of all three areas. So if Reed gets hurt, if any one of these guys gets hurt, now he just kind of jumps into a really big role if they miss extended time. So I think there's going to be windows where you want to start him, but it's certainly not, someone you can go into the season saying, okay, this is my wide receiver 3. I think that's kind of, you're setting yourself up for issues if all these guys stay healthy.
Do you think there's a scenario where maybe after this season, the Packers look to trade one of Watson or Dobbs to open up room for a Dontavian Wicks, a Bo Melton?
I mean, it's possible. I don't think that's something they would actively do. I mean, if somebody came to them and offered them, a Godfather offer they couldn't refuse, I think they would do it. But I don't think it's something that they're going to actively try to do. They like keeping their guys around. And it's not like, with Watson's injury issues, it's not like he's going to be that expensive. Neither is Romeo Dobbs. I think
but all it takes is one good season, right? One good season, and their agent says, "Oh, he's a $30 million wide receiver."
30 million might be a stretch, but I just don't. It almost becomes a self.
This is agent speak, Joel. They make no sense.
Understood. You got to get your bag. You do what's right for your client, but it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And there's so many guys here and it's such a diverse offense that I don't know that any of them can, other than Watson's the one guy who could just kind of take the step and become elite, just because when he's healthy, the offense runs through him. He's the guy who can kind of do everything and the most talented of them. But other than that, I don't know that any of these guys really have the opportunity to kind of break out and be a consistent elite player that would demand that kind of money.
Okay. So next up, I'm going to move on to the running backs. So Josh Jacobs obviously comes in. What is it, 5 years over in Las Vegas, Oakland, however long they've been there. Put up some solid workhorse seasons, right? And the efficiency kind of meh. Starting to fall a little bit. Obviously, a lot of miles on the tires. But when you look at, the type of running back that he is, it feels like that he's the type of guy that can really kind of, carry that workload. Brings in 4-year deal. The way that it's structured, Packers can easily get out of it after 1 year. Spend a 3rd-round pick on Marshawn Lloyd. Are we setting ourselves up for just 1 year of Josh Jacobs, or is Jacobs a fair price to be like, all right, I'm going to go out and get this guy because of the type of running back that he is, and he can be that lead dog here in Green Bay?
Yeah, I think he will. If I had to place my bets, place a bet, I think he'll play 2 years there. I don't think it'll be any more than that, but I think he'll be good enough that they want to bring him back. It's still not crazy expensive to bring him back next year. Especially if you're kind of set up with Jacobs and Lloyd. If Lloyd can kind of fix the kind of soft skills that I think he's really weak at. So, and like LaFleur has always wanted to run 2 running backs. He's wanted to have a rotation. So yeah, I don't think it's just going to be just this year for Josh Jacobs. I don't think he's going to kind of tank and be so bad that they have to say, okay, we just don't want you around anymore. He's been fairly, like, the one thing you got to give him is he's been very reliable, right? He's missed very little time. So yeah, he has kind of earned that workhorse label. So yeah, I think he's probably got a couple years there, but I wouldn't bet on anything more than that.
So him not missing a ton of time feels very much like a misnomer. He's only played 1 full season in the NFL. When did they move to 17 games? Was it 2020 or 2021?
20.
You remember?
21.
21? Okay. So his rookie year, he missed 3 games.
Yeah, it was 20.
Missed 2 games in 2020. 2 games in 2021, played a full season 2022, and then missed 4 games last year. So he does get dinged up, sure, but I mean, that's every running back. So, hold it against him what you will. But I think my bigger point with Josh Jacobs and where he kind of fits in this offense, especially with the amount of pass catchers that they have, For 3 straight years, he's seen 54 or more targets. Do we think that he can hold those numbers with the amount of pass catchers they already have? Because if he can't, that knocks his dynasty value a ton, in my opinion.
I think it's going to be. I think it'll be close to that. Like, I don't think he's going to get split out like they used to do with Aaron Jones when he was in there. I don't think that's a role that he's really going to excel in. I think he could get, in that 45, 50, 55 area. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think there's any way it goes over that, but I think it just kind of depends on Marshawn Lloyd, and they've really talked him up. But I still think he's got to prove he can pass protect. He's got to prove he can catch the ball. He's got to prove he can hang on to the ball. Those are real concerns. If you can't do that stuff, you don't get on the field. You don't get snaps. So I think it kind of depends more on what Lloyd can do and how many snaps he can take away from Jacobs than so I think that's the bigger question.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out why they even re-signed AJ Dillon to the whatever they re-signed him for, because
it's basically a sub-minimum contract.
Oh no, 100%. Like they could very easily
he could very easily cut him in camp. Yeah. Honestly, I think it was more of a locker room signing than anything.
I guess. I love Dillon just because he's embraced the fantasy football community and loves playing the game and chatting it up with us. But like we've seen this guy for 4 years and he ain't done shit. So he's everybody was like, oh, he's the next Derrick Henry, blah blah blah. Like, come on, get out of here. There's only one Derrick.
He's a one direction guy who's not really that good at going that one direction. So. He has no lateral ability at all. It's just straight ahead, and he's not a great overpowering straight ahead runner. He's not a Brandon Jacobs or anything like that. So yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if he even makes the team.
Fair enough. All right, let's hit into these tight ends because Musgrave got the early run. It's pretty clear that he is the starter here in this offense. He was the earlier of the 2 draft picks. Musgrave, I believe, went in the 2nd round, Kraft in the 3rd. Then when Musgrave got hurt, big shocker, missed a lot of time in college, Tucker Kraft comes in and, by all accounts, looked better. So, Joel, I ask, Musgrave or Kraft? Pick your side, sir.
So I'll push back on the injury thing a little bit. Like, his injuries in college were knee injuries, and last year, he missed time because of a kidney laceration on a borderline dirty hit. It was a not clean hit. So I don't know that you can really hold that against him. I think it's for fantasy, it's Musgrave. Like, he was a surprisingly good-ish blocker. He was better than I expected him to be. Kraft was
he wasn't great in college.
No. So he was better. He was better than like Dalton Kincaid, in that Kincaid was like just objectively awful as a blocker, but Musgrave could be like a get in the way kind of blocker. But he was actually pretty decent as the season went on. Kraft was a pretty good blocker, especially in the run game, and was really good at those kind of leak out routes where he would just block, take 5 steps, catch the ball, and get downfield. I don't know how much value Kraft has unless there is a Musgrave injury, but if the contingent value here is very high, because if Musgrave were to miss significant time, then Kraft would be extremely valuable because they really have no one behind. They get Ben Sims, who's a blocker only. So, but I think Musgrave's got some real breakout potential here, and that he's one of those guys who I think his body just kind of outgrew his coordination. And if you looked at some of the plays he made last year, where he looked like almost like a baby giraffe or like baby Bambi on the ice, something like that, where he just didn't feel like he had the cord. It didn't feel like he was really coordinated. That kind of especially with tight ends, that coordination kind of comes later because they're basically high school receivers who outgrow the position and become tight ends. So I think once he gets a full off season, to kind of work with the weights, work with the training staff, kind of grows into his body a little bit. I think there's real fantasy potential here.
Yeah, I do like Musgrave. My biggest worry is, again, it's the same thing with Josh Jacobs from a pass catching perspective. How much are these wide receivers going to eat, and how much are they going to leave for the tight ends? Because you could very realistically see a scenario where Musgrave never tops 50 targets, and then Kraft gets, 35 to 45. and they're now kind of eating at each other's, tight end share, which if it was just one that got 90 targets, we could be all in, even if, the wide receivers still eat, right? Because Jordan Love is going to throw the football 550 plus times. So there's enough pieces of the pie there that one of these guys can be elite. But if they keep kind of, grabbing at each other's targets, then, they're useless assets at that point.
I think Musgrave is the one kind of secondary guy on this offense whose value really needs Christian Watson to be on the field, because Watson, if he can kind of stay on the field and if he can kind of take out those deep clear out routes, because he's the one guy with kind of speed and physical ability that can do that and just open up the seam for Musgrave. So I think if Christian Watson stays on the field, and that would allow LaFleur to run the 2 tight end sets that I talked about earlier, it's having Watson on the field just makes that much more likely, because there's really no one else who can kind of take that opposite X receiver from on the other side of Dobbs. So I think the more Watson is on the field, the more valuable Musgrave is going to be.
Fair enough. All right. It was about 24 minutes on the Packers, Joel. Was that enough, or do we need to keep going?
That's enough for now. We probably don't want to talk about the defense, so we can move on this show.
All right. Moving on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Front office here, Jason Licht, whatever. I don't know how to pronounce it. GM 9th season. He obviously, been there since Bruce Arians times. Todd Bowles going into his 3rd season now as a head coach. New offensive coordinator. Dave Canales ended up going to take the Carolina Panthers head coach job. So they bring in Liam Cohen, who's worked with Sean McVay a few times, was the offensive coordinator in University of Kentucky, working with Will Levis. Has a previous relationship with Baker from his time with the Rams. So, more than likely going to see some similarities to that Ram style of offense. Well, do they have the pieces on offense to try to replicate that? I guess we're going to find out. So the aforementioned Baker Mayfield, the starting quarterback, came over last year in a sort of a prove-it deal. Well, he proved himself and earned himself a 3-year, $100 million extension this offseason. He's 29 years old. Running back room, Rachaad White, heading into his 3rd season. He's 25. They spent a 3rd-round pick this year on Bucky Irving out of Oregon. He's 22. And, of course, the pass catchers. And honestly, not a whole lot to talk about. We've got Mike Evans, who re-signed this offseason. He's 31. Chris Godwin, he's going to be a free agent after this year. He's 28. They drafted Jalen McMillan, who's 23. They also have, I believe it is Trey Palmer, slot receiver. I always get Trey Palmer, Trey Tucker with the Raiders. I always get those guys mixed up because they came out the same year. And then they have Cade Otton, 3rd-year tight end, who is 25. All right, Joel, we're going to start with Rachaad White, because to me, he's just Joe Mixon light, most inefficient running back. But what I'm trying to figure out is the inefficiency a product of this Bucs offensive line, which has not been good blocking up the middle, or is Rachaad White just ass?
I'm going to lean it's more the offensive line, because they've had these problems ever since Leonard Fournette was there, predating Rachaad White. But yeah, I think Joe Mixon's a pretty good
Rachaad White's
comp.
just not a big guy, though.
No, he's not. But I think Joe Mixon's a fair comp. He's not super talented, but the volume role is going to be there. And they obviously trust him, because they didn't draft anyone. Bucky Irving was a pass catching only back in college, and basically, similar to what Rachaad White did last year, but didn't test well at all. It was really kind of disappointing in his combine testing. So I don't know that there's a lot of optimism that he could take over in any significant way if there was a Rachaad White injury. So they clearly trust Rachaad White to be the guy. So, as much as I think you could see a similar production profile to Joe Mixon, as much as we don't like him, as long as he stays healthy, he just keeps putting up numbers because he keeps getting volume.
Yeah, but he's not scoring touchdowns. That's why we like Mixon. He scores touchdowns. Rachaad White can't score touchdowns.
No, you also have Baker Mayfield as your quarterback instead of Joe Burrow.
Hey, Baker had 28 passing touchdowns last year.
I agree. But I think a Joe Burrow offense would be expected to score more touchdowns than a Baker Mayfield offense, just in general.
I mean, that's fair. I don't know. My whole thing with the Rachaad White, and I know there's probably some level of bias here. So we did one of our Stars of Tomorrow episodes on NPI, 3 seasons ago when Rachaad White came out. And we had on Katie Flower, the diva of Debbie, for that episode. And she's always been real big into scouting running backs. And one of her biggest tools when it comes to scouting running backs, what she looks for is steak ass. She wants thick in the legs. And she used to preach. She's like, Rachaad White ain't got no steak ass, so I ain't want nothing to do with him. And I've always had that in the back of my head. And so when I sit here and I see him and this 3.7, 3.9 yards per carry, I just don't want anything to do with it. He doesn't break tackles. He can't get through the middle. Get him on the outside and let him run. That's perfect. Let him catch passes, turn it up the field. That's perfect. That is what he profiles as. And this is my issue. They drafted the exact same running back in Bucky Irving. That's what he does. He get him on the side and let him use his feet. His play speed is so much different than what he tested at when you watch the tape. So, I really don't know what to make of this running back room. And I've seen this now. This is, I think, the third team this offseason that's really kind of done this, where you kind of expected them to go out and get an antithesis running back, right? Like somebody that, kind of profiles as more of a scat back, bring in a bigger body guy that can handle the interior runs. Tennessee, they go out, they've got Tajay Spears. They went out and signed literally his clone in Tony Pollard. There's no, up the middle bruiser. What are we doing? Tampa did the exact same thing in drafting Bucky Irving instead of maybe going out and getting like an Audric Estime, right? I don't know what to make of this room. If I have Rachaad White in Dynasty, I am holding because I know that for the volume that I get, I'm not getting appropriate value. Do you think that's a fair statement?
So I think you brought up a good point, is that these teams are starting to want redundancy rather than differentiation, right? And the same thing the Rams did with Blake Corum, right? They have Kyren Williams. They just want another Kyren Williams. They don't want a different kind of running back. And so that was why I was still high on Kyren Williams, is that they didn't sign or draft a Braylon Allen or an Estime, a completely different kind of player. They signed the same player. So they just want to give him a break, and they want, like I said, they want redundancy. And I think this is the same thing with Stroud White. There's no reason to think he's not going to maintain the same role he had last year. So, don't get me wrong. He profiles perfectly as like a dead zone kind of running back kind of guy. But unless there's an injury, there's no reason to think that he's not going to get that same workload. So, and because, we know that pass reception, that kind of reception volume is just much more valuable than carries. I don't see why his value is going to go down unless there's an injury.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is that maybe potentially Irving cuts into the amount of targets. I say maybe. The biggest reason, because I look back at last year when the Jags drafted Tank Bigsby to take pressure off of Travis Etienne, right? Obviously, that didn't come to fruition, but you saw in the early going of that season, they were trying to give Tank Bigsby work. They were trying to rest Travis Etienne. And then they realized, Bigsby, you fucking suck, bro.
You suck.
We've got to rely on Travis Etienne, right? I think we're going to see the same thing here in Tampa. Bucky Irving is going to get some early run because the team needs to see, can he, be that rotational piece? Can he help us give Rachaad White a break, right? By week 5, we're going to know what kind of volume Rachaad White is in for this season. Because if he gets hurt, which, again, he played 17 games 2 straight years. We're heading into his 3rd season. He's not a big guy. Guy's built like a toothpick and somehow weighs 215 pounds, which I don't get. But seriously, it makes no sense to me.
It feels like a college team fluffing that number.
But that's what he weighed at the combine. And it's just like, it's baffling to me.
How?
But we're going to figure it out really quickly with Bucky Irving and how valuable Rachaad White can be. But again, he doesn't score rushing touchdowns. I think he only had 6 last year. He had, I believe, 3 in the passing game, which is great. And Baker's going to spread the football around. That's always been his MO. So there's a potential there for the passing work that will keep his value inflated in that top 10. But I'm with you. He's a dead zone type running back. He's not the guy that I'm targeting in dynasty startups, and probably more of like a mid-season buy in dynasty, because the production is going to be there and running backs are going to drop like flies. But that's when you're paying, peak value, when really, in my opinion, he's not worth that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, is he a guy I'm targeting startups? No, absolutely not. Especially because I'm a 0 RB guy. He's the kind of guy I just do not care about, and I'm never going to draft. But yeah, I think he's a guy that, you get to week 8 and you're a running back away from a title and he's still healthy. Then yeah, he's a guy I'll throw the first at, because I think he's going to be productive enough that he can help carry me.
All right, let's move on to the pass catchers. So Chris Godwin. And I want to talk specifically about him because really I don't see any young options on this team that really sort of tickle my fancy, because they're just running it back. Mike Evans, 31 years old, 3-year extension. Chris Godwin's 28, right? What are we doing with Chris Godwin? What is his value? Because I remember 3 years ago, maybe 4, whatever it was, people were talking about Chris Godwin as like a top 3 wide receiver in Dynasty. That was very short-lived because he hasn't come close to replicating that season. So where do you sit on Chris Godwin? Because I feel like a lot of people are in this year because of the 4 magic words, the Cooper Kupp role. And moving back to the slot, I think, is a great thing for him. But I don't know how long he can truly maintain that value because of where he's at age-wise, right? So where are you kind of sitting on Chris Godwin in Dynasty?
I'm treating him exactly like I would like a Deebo Samuel or something like that, in that he's never going to have trade value. You're never going to get his production's worth in a trade, but I think he could be really valuable this year. So if you're a contender and you can go out and get him from a non-contending team for a price that's, again, that doesn't reflect his actual production value, I'm all over that. Like you mentioned, the slot role, the one real criticism you can have of Dave Canales last year was his usage of Godwin. And then he moved him outside like 50% of the time, where he had been a 2/3 slot guy, and it really affected his production. And now, Cohen coming in, who they've said they're going to move him back to a basically a full-time slot role, which is where he should be. You got McMillan, who they brought in, who they've talked up quite a bit in the preseason, who can be flexible, either a slot or an outside player. Whereas like Trey Palmer's not an outside player. I don't know why. He's slot only. I don't know why you even want him on the field. He just had a couple, random touchdowns that happened to happen on games when he tweeted that he wasn't getting played enough. Whatever. Good luck with that. I think he's going to get a much heavier slot role on. I think he's going to be much more productive. So than he was last year. I think you could see, basically the production levels he had going back to before he tore up his ACL, to where he was a borderline elite receiver. He's someone I'm targeting on contending teams.
I get that. With Godwin, I think, and kind of going into Dave Canales, and I talked about this kind of heading into last season when they brought in Canales as the OC. This is what Shane Waldron and Canales did in Seattle, right? They had Tyler Lockett, who could move inside and outside. And they were basically trying to fit Chris Godwin into that exact role. But the problem, again, Godwin's just not near as effective playing outside. His production is so much better from the slot. But they didn't have anyone else on that team that could truly be an outside option with Mike Evans. They have that now with Jalen McMillan, who can play inside and outside. He can be effective at both places. That allows the team to be able to keep Godwin there. And Liam Cohen's going to run a lot of 11 personnel. Sean McVay, for what feels like half a century now, has been the one team that runs the most 11 personnel in the NFL. So would not surprise me one bit if this is what this team is going to do, because they only have one viable tight end anyway. Cade Otton played, I think, 100% of the snaps. So they're going to trot out Cade Otton. He's going to be the blocker. He's going to be the Tyler Higbee version in this offense. Probably end up doing it better. Like, I like Cade Otton as a talent, but he's just not going to see the amount of volume that really, makes him any level of a fantasy asset. I'm definitely with you when it comes to kind of the value. And I love that Deebo Samuel comp when it comes to value, because I want nothing to do with Deebo Samuel in Dynasty. Nothing. Because to me, he's just a playmaker, and I treat returners like that. And that's kind of the way that I look at Deebo, because I don't know what kind of target volume he's going to get, but I also know that he's going to see some rushing attempts. But I don't ever want to rely on rushing attempts if I'm trying to target a wide receiver, especially when I have a running back like Christian McCaffrey in front of Deebo Samuel, right? He's going to get the lion's share of carries. Deebo can do a lot of really great things with the football, scores touchdowns. I think he had 9 last year, like 5 receiving, 4 rushing, or whatever it was. Godwin obviously isn't going to get that receiving work, but he can see 130 targets, which Deebo's not going to do, because they're not throwing to anybody else. It's Evans, it's Godwin, it's Rachaad White. That's the big 3 in the system. But we saw Baker heavily target the slot in Cleveland with Jarvis Landry. Like, he's fine throwing in that direction, and Godwin knows how to get open, and he's going to have a lot more mismatches out of the
And he was productive in the role last year. He just didn't get the role enough.
Correct. Yeah. And I think, getting him in that spot roughly 70% of the time, I think there's top 15 upside when you look at it that way. But, then it becomes, well, hey, if Liam Cohen's this good, maybe he's a head coaching candidate. And then we're right back to square one with Chris Godwin and somebody trying to say, oh, you can play outside. We're going to fit you over here. And then that just tanks his dynasty value again. So
the other thing about the Bucs in particular, they're going to have a really soft schedule for playoff or for fantasy, because like the other defenses in this division are terrible. All of them are bad, objectively. But well, I mean, the Saints are okay, but they're super old. They play the AFC West out of division, so you got the Chargers who are going to be bad. I think the Raiders are going to be good. We'll see what happens with the Chiefs with all the guys they lost, specifically Snead, but they should still be good. But Chargers and Broncos are going to be terrible. So they've got some opponents who are going to be some really bad defenses.
Be a lot of fun. All right, let's move on to the haymaker here. It's Baker Mayfield. He's the captain of the ship. Last year, he's a former number 1 overall pick. We knew he should be good, right? Had some ups and downs in Cleveland, saw some of the potential. Probably not like an elite quarterback, but definitely not a bad one, right? But we've seen bad Baker. Dave Canales kind of fixed him last year, earned that contract extension, bring in a new coordinator, new quarterback coach, whole 9 yards. Was last year a flash in the pan, or can we continue to rely on Baker to help the weapons around him be fantasy viable options?
I think what you saw last year is what you're going to get from Baker, and that's a perfectly serviceable fantasy quarterback. Like, he's always going to throw those killer interceptions that are just going to kill you as a real life quarterback, that are, you're not going to get more than the 30 million or 33 million that he got as on a contract, just because those kind of decisions are going to kind of limit your upside. But I mean, you can go back to his little kind of mini stint on the Rams at the end of 22. Like, he played pretty well, but that team just had no weapons. It was just completely devoid of offensive passing options. You give him the talent that he has around him with Evans, Godwin, Rachaad White as a pass catcher out of the backfield. I think McMillan's going to be a pretty good player. I think he'll be a perfectly serviceable real life and fantasy quarterback. He's never going to be elite, but I think he's a starter. He's a quality starter level player.
Yeah, that's kind of where I look at Baker, especially from a fantasy perspective. Like, I think he's a really good QB3 and a serviceable QB2 in Superflex, right?
Yep.
If you get that one elite option, let's say you've got Josh Allen, right? The odds are you're probably not going to be able to pair Josh Allen with like another top 10 quarterback. I think Baker's a perfectly fine like QB complement when building out a Superflex team.
And if you take Allen at number 1 and just want to kind of, load up on skill position players to go with him, and then, take Baker
in the 4th, 5th, whatever it may be.
Yeah, exactly. 5th, 6th round, whatever he goes. Yeah, I think that's a perfectly viable strategy for starting a Superflex team.
I like it. All right. And we're switching gears here, going over to the Houston Texans, because that is what everybody wants to talk about. So many good things to like on this team. Nick Caserio's built I feel like he got a lot of flack because he really had to tear this team down because Bill O'Brien sunk this ship, man. Yep. So he had to plug a lot of holes, a lot of controversy with how he hired and handled the head coaching. Going from what was it, Steve Wilkes to Lovie Smith to now D'Amico Ryans. But I'll tell you what, he hit a home run with D'Amico Ryans, man. Fucking love that guy. But Caserio, 4th season, D'Amico Ryans heading into his 2nd season, and his pick for OC last year, Bobby Slowick, shot out of a cannon. Homeboy was looking really good.
Another home run.
Passed over the opportunity for some head coaching jobs to stick around and kind of see this thing through, which I think was a really good thing because now he's got some pressure on him, and let's see how he kind of handles that. But more to the point, they added some weapons to this offense to really help CJ Stroud bring out his full potential. At the aforementioned Stroud, 23, heading into his 2nd year. They go out and trade for Joe Mixon from the Bengals and immediately sign him to a 3-year deal. He's 28 years old and has a lot of miles on those treads. Still have Dameon Pierce heading into his 3rd season, which really I think he's just kind of a kick returner at this point. But who knows? If the wear and tear gets to Mixon, we might be seeing a lot of Dameon Pierce, and those people that acquired him on the heavy after that surprising rookie season may get some return on that value eventually. Moving into the pass catchers, Nico Collins, 25, recently signed a 3-year extension, $73 million deal. They go out and they trade for Stephon Diggs, 31 years old, restructured his contract. He's now going to be a free agent after this year. Drafted Tank Dell last year, who was the hand-picked guy that CJ Stroud wanted. He's 25, heading into his 2nd season. And then Dalton Schultz, who they signed to a 3-year extension this year after a 1-year prove-it deal last year. He's 28 years old. All right. To me, the biggest debate when it comes to Dynasty is who is the Texans wide receiver that you want. So let's start right here. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, choose your side, Joel.
I think Nico Collins is an elite receiver. So if you can get him for anything less than elite receiver price, I think he's worth buying. I mean, if you look at his metrics, he is top of the charts. Like yards per route run, yards per target. I mean, the dude is just elite. He had an elite season last year, and a guy who was kind of flying under the radar for a couple of years, couldn't stay healthy. We always thought that there was more production capability there. Kind of an underrated prospect, and then you give him an elite quarterback and a very good to elite offensive coordinator play caller, and then you saw the breakout. I think Nico Collins is elite. I think he should be drafted. In a startup, I think he should go. I think he's a top 10. He should be a top 10 receiver.
Okay.
And that's no disrespect to Tank Dell. That's how much I like Nico Collins.
I like it. I remember his rookie season coming out. Like I scooped up so much Nico Collins because he was going in the 3rd round. He was heading to a team that had literally no weapons. And I'm like, you know what? It's a 3rd round pick. What the fuck? Let's take a shot. I'm fairly certain I have 0 Nico Collins shares because I traded all of them last season.
That's rough.
Not because I felt like he was going to be a flash in the pan, but I just wanted to take advantage of the value spike. I mean, at the end of the day, he was a 3rd round pick. So, I don't think it was as drastic as trading off like a Puka Nacua after like a big breakout and then of course seeing what he did last year and now how he's vaulted up into the top upper echelon of wide receivers in dynasty startups. But I think when you look at those scenarios like a Nico versus a Puka, Nico is a big time value when it comes to that. They did sign him to a 3-year, $73 million deal, which to me doesn't scream the Texans believe in him as an elite weapon. That to me that's Jalen Waddle money, right? Like that's high-end wide receiver 2 money. When I look at it, they bring in Stephon Diggs, who is a known target hog. And now it becomes, do they think that Nico still needs to grow a little bit and learn a thing or two? Or is he going to be that true definitive wide receiver 1? Like that's kind of where I'm at on Nico. I'm not as high on him as you are. I think he has some elite traits, But when they had Tank Dell healthy last year, Nico really didn't pop the way that he did without Tank Dell. And I don't know if that was necessarily because Tank Dell is more talented than Nico. I think it was just that CJ Stroud was looking for, this maybe the safer plays and just kind of let Tank Dell sort of, make the plays that he makes, right? I still kind of worry from a separation perspective with Nico. And I think that's why he does so well downfield, because he has the ability to get downfield, but he doesn't know how to operate in that short to intermediate. And I think that's why they felt the need to go out and get somebody like Stephon Diggs who has that ability tenfold. What do you think of that?
I would say that if you look at their contracts, they signed Nico to a 3-year extension, and they gave Diggs they basically renegotiated Diggs' deal, Diggs' deal, so he could be a free agent next year. Yeah. That tells you where they expect this receiver room to go from here.
I agree. But when it comes to Tank Dell, I think his price is too high in Dynasty. I think people are all over this kid, and I'm not 100% convinced that he's not going to come off the field when they run 2 tight end or 2 running back sets. And that, to me, just diminishes his value. Plus, he's an older rookie. The same way that we were talking about Calvin Ridley for a long time, who came into the league at 24, that same sentiment should be echoed with Tank Dell. He was a 24-year-old rookie last year, got hurt blocking. The guy's the size, of a freaking twig. But I love him. I think he's electric. I don't see I don't want to call it elite ceiling, because I think he can have seasons like that the way that CJ Stroud passes the football. But I don't think he can be that consistent, downfield threat that really racks up not only the yards and touchdowns, but also the receptions.
I guess I kind of agree. I mean, if you ask me to rank who the secondary kind of breakout rookie receivers last year, like Rashee Rice, Jaden Reed, Tank Dell, I would have Dell ranked 3rd among those 3. He is really small. I don't know why in any given alternate universe you would have Tank Dell blocking in line on a running play. That makes zero sense whatsoever. And they got punished appropriately for it. Not that, an injury is ever appropriate, but it was a terrible decision. I just don't know. Obviously, in 2 receiver sets, it's going to be Nico and Diggs, and Dell's going to be like, I have the same concerns with Dell that I do with Jaden Reed. Is that, how many snaps is he actually going to get? Even if he is super productive when he's on the field, I think his snap share is going to be limited just by kind of the talent around him. So I mean, if the question is Nico or Tank Dell, it's Nico, and it's not close, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm definitely Nico over Dell when it comes to Dynasty. I'm curious what kind of tier you would put Tank Dell, because you've already said that you've got Nico kind of in that elite tier, right? Like he's with the big dogs. Where does Tank Dell fall? And by proxy, Jaden Reed, because it kind of seems like you grouped them in the same bucket.
Yeah, I would have, like I said, I like Rashee, Jaden Reed, Tank Dell. I would have them all, kind of back end wide receiver 2s. That ideally I would like those guys to be wide receiver 3s and have 2 better options ahead of them. But
more consistent options.
Yeah, if those guys are your wide receiver, if you get an elite wide receiver 1 and that's your wide receiver 2, and you've got another kind of guy similar to that as your wide receiver 3, I'm okay with that. But I don't really want to be. If somebody's got Jalen Waddle as their wide receiver 2 and I'm lining up Tank Dell, then I feel like I'm falling behind at that spot.
Yeah, I'd be definitely very nervous there. All right. For the topic that everybody's been waiting for, let's talk CJ Stroud, because he balled out last year. 4,100 yards, a little bit of an injury, only 23 touchdowns, but 5 interceptions. Very solid numbers for a rookie. Sky is clearly the limit, right? What tier are we putting him in? And how much higher can he get?
I mean, he's tier 2 for me. Like we said earlier, he should be valued with Joe Burrow, Jordan Love, CJ Stroud. They should all be in that same tier, same grouping, because they're all the exact same player, right? They're all primarily pocket quarterbacks whose value is going to be in passing yardage and in passing touchdowns. They're all in very good offenses that can be expected to put up a high touchdown seasons. So they've all got that potential. But if you look at the top tier, which is, I would consider Allen, Hurts, Mahomes, and Lamar Jackson, Mahomes is the only one of those who is not a primarily running quarterback and who doesn't get a lot of touch or rushing touchdown equity in his fantasy scoring. But he belongs in that tier because he's had a 50 touchdown season. He's had, consistently elite passing touchdown seasons. Unless and until those guys get to the Mahomes level, they're not tier 1 quarterbacks. They have to prove that they can be at that level for 4, 5, 6 years before I would consider them a tier 1 quarterback that I could draft confidently with the running quarterbacks as a QB1.
Yeah, I don't even want to go too much more into it because I feel the exact same way. I mean, we've seen the high side of Joe Burrow, right? We've seen the high side of Justin Herbert. We've seen the high side of Patrick Mahomes. I feel like we really haven't seen the high side yet of CJ Stroud, which is fine. But what he displayed last year gives us a reason to believe that his high side is that. Could he ascend with Patrick Mahomes? I think 100% he could, because he is a very athletic quarterback, right? He just doesn't really look to run because he hasn't needed to run, and that's fine. And I feel like we said a lot of the same thing with Justin Fields his rookie year. It was, he never ran at Ohio State, but then, runs a 4.3 40 or whatever it was at the combine. It's like, oh, he actually can do this. But then was forced to in the NFL because he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn passing the football. CJ Stroud's the complete opposite from that front. He's a really talented thrower of the football, has the athletic juice, but just doesn't use it and doesn't want to use it because of what he's able to do with his arm. And now he has the weapons around him to where we may never see that rushing upside with CJ Stroud, in my opinion, which is fine. But again, that will cap his fantasy upside that Mahomes presents because he hits that 5,000, he hits that 50, right? I really want to know if there's a year where CJ Stroud could hit those numbers. Do you think it's this year with the weapons that he has?
No, I don't, because he's still got Bobby Slowick, and they made Devin Singletary into a fantasy, basically, I don't want to say fantasy star, but he was a consistent fantasy level starter last year once he took over the role to himself. He's from the Shanahan tree. They're going to get the running backs involved. So you're going to have to have a random, just heavy passing touchdown season, which I don't think he's going to get with Slowick, especially now that they made a commitment to Joe Mixon. They gave him a 3-year contract that wasn't cheap. So I just don't think you're going to see that, 45, 50 touchdown season in this particular offense.
Well, I mean, the good news is that Slowick is shot out of a cannon. He may not be here much longer. So
exactly. But then you've got
now. What you're saying, Joel, the best thing for CJ Stroud, get Bobby Slowick a head coaching job.
For fantasy, it could be, yeah. I just don't think this offense is going to be very conducive to him having that kind of super elite passing touchdown season that it would require to get into that top tier.
All right, fair enough. All right, let's get into our biggest dynasty sells from the Packers, from the Bucs, from the Texans. Joel, let's start with the Packers.
Obviously, this is like trying to sell off one of my children. I would say it's probably Jaden Reed, just because of the concerns we listed earlier with what's his snap share going to be. If we talked about Musgrave being a guy who could really see a bump if Christian Watson stays healthy. If Christian Watson stays healthy, then Jaden Reed's the guy who's going to take whose production and snaps are going to take a real dip. So I think he's the guy I would look to move while his value is high.
I think that makes perfect sense. I think I have Jaden Reed in maybe 1 or 2 leagues. I probably should look to take advantage of it, but it's a championship, like win now team. So I'm like, I don't know if I really want to get rid of that. But I think maybe if the right offer is there and I can find somebody that has maybe like equal to production wise, and maybe is a little bit more consistent, it definitely might be worth it, especially if I can get a piece tacked onto it. I don't hate that. And for the Bucs,
it's got to be Rachaad White.
Get him out of here.
You're not getting anything from Mike Evans. I've got Godwin as a buy. So, I mean, what else are you selling off this team? And honestly, Rachaad White doesn't have a super huge market for a guy as productive as he was, because I think a lot of people think like we do, that he's not that talented a back. He's not someone you want to use as a franchise cornerstone running back. So I don't know that he has much of a market, but of the guys on this team, he would be my most likely.
All right, so I want to go back to Jaden Reed for a second because Joe popped this in the chat. What if Reed doesn't allow that to happen, being taken off the field by being too good?
I mean, you got to ask Matt LaFleur about that. It's just how much is he going to run through receiver sets? I mean, this is not Sean McVay where his default
is 3.
Is 3, right? He's, like I said, he's going to want to get LaFleur or Musgrave and Tucker Kraft on the field as much as he can. He talked about it last year. Like when Musgrave was out, he talked about wanting to get Musgrave back so he could put those guys both on the field at the same time and how many plays he could design with that formation. So I think they know how good Jaden. I don't think there's any question that the Packers know how good Jaden Reed is. It's just what kind of formations does LaFleur want? And if the Packers are really good and they're ahead, they're not going to be running, they're not going to be passing a lot in the second half of games. Game script could go against Jaden Reed as much as anything.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. And I mean, Joe, obviously he's a Reed guy. Look, I
love him. He's a great player. Yeah. There's no question.
He hit for my projections for 2024. He's my wide receiver 16. Like, I'm unquestionably high on him. I truthfully don't know how much I'm going to have of him in redraft though, because I think, much like we've talked about with Dynasty here, he's going to be a headache in managed leagues because there's going to be days where you start him and he puts up a goose egg. And, usually with these peaks and valleys, you're hoping for at least 4 for 40 from a wide receiver, right? Like, his valleys are like Death Valley. Like, they're bad. So that doesn't
0
help
touches
much in a managed league. 0
touches in a game they put up 40 points.
Yeah. So that truly is, it's a problem. It's kind of, I don't even want to put it in terms of like T. Higgins, because with Higgins, like, he was missing literal games, like, starting and not, leaving after like 10 snaps because he was trying to push through an injury or something. But
different situation.
Very different situations. But to me, Jaden Reed is very much a scheme guy. And that's not to take away from his talent. It's when he's on the field, they know how talented he is and they want to get him the football.
They script him plays. Like they want to get the ball in his hands.
They script him plays, 100%. Yeah. And again, that's not a bad thing, but they're going to seek out the mismatches. And if the mismatch that given week means Jaden Reed's off the field for 40% of the snaps or 60% of the snaps, that's what's going to happen. And that makes it very difficult. Like, he's one of these guys, like, and I point to analysts all the time. It's like, dude, you're digging way too much into the analytics, right? You're trying to cherry pick shit. Jaden Reed is the guy you need to cherry pick for. I hate to say that, but it's true. Because you can't just look at a team and say, oh, they get dominated by X, Y, and Z. Oh, Jaden Reed is going to be to the moon and then has 3 points. Like that's like, you really need to look at, all right, this team gives up X amount of fantasy points when teams are in 12 personnel. Those are the stats that I want to see when you're telling me to start Jaden Reed. And I hate to say that, but it's so true.
And if he was like, you're absolutely right. He is a analytic darling because he was very good on a per route basis. If he was on a McVay kind of disciple, and LaFleur did work with McVay, but I need to say, LaFleur is much more of a Shanahan guy than a McVay guy because McVay wants to run 3 wide receivers a shit ton. Like if he was in Atlanta with Robinson, if he was in Tampa with Liam Cohen, obviously Godwin would be an obstacle, but If he was in one of those kind of offenses, I think, yes, then you could make the Cooper Kupp comparison and you could see him being that kind of player. It's not going to happen in this offense. I love the guy. It's just not going to happen in this offense.
Yeah, Jaden Reed, to me, is Deebo Samuel light. Like the way that they use him in that the rushing attack as well. Like, I mean, he had 11 rush attempts. I don't know it's really going to get much more than that simply because he's not near as big as Deebo. And very few wide receivers have the forced missed tackle ability that Deebo Samuel has. But what I'm getting at is how they use him. They're not afraid to use him in the running game, right? The point is they're going to script plays for him.
And
to
you're
wrap
also
up
going to
really
see,
quick.
You're going to see some boom weeks like Deebo Samuel has. You absolutely will. But again, in a managed league, you're also going to see some 0 weeks, and that's what kills you.
Yeah. All right. Biggest dynasty sell from the Texans, because this is going to ruffle some feathers, Joel.
It's Stroud. It's easily Stroud, because he's being valued. When the Diggs trade happened, he was being valued. He was on keep trade cut for a while as the number 1 dynasty quarterback. That's insane. It doesn't make any sense. I've made so much money this offseason by selling Stroud for other quarterbacks and a high first. Like I got Tua and a high first for him. I got Jordan Love and a high first for him. I got Dak Prescott and a high first for him. Sell him now before people realize what he is. He's good. Don't get me wrong. He's absolutely very good.
I'm jealous of that. And it makes me realize that I'm not in enough industry dynasty leagues, because the dynasty leagues where I have CJ Stroud, I can't get shit for him. And it pisses me off. Like I'm trying to quote unquote tier down when really I'm trying to tier up. Like I've thrown out some offers like, Stroud for like Jalen Hurts plus or whatever, because like people seem to be so down on Jalen Hurts and they're like, Stroud doesn't run. Why would I do this? And I'm like, damn it, you're not reading the same shit that I'm reading.
That's where the rubber hits the road, and those trades just don't happen. Yeah.
It's very annoying. Very annoying. All right, man. Joel, that about wraps it up, buddy.
Good stuff.
Good show, man.
Fun teams this week.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this was a good one. 100%. Definitely want to reiterate, head over to dynastynerds.com, enter promo code Club Fantasy, save yourself 15% off. So many great things. What's really cool, their Dynasty GM tool, you can actually input all of your Dynasty leagues, whether it's from My Fantasy League, Sleeper, obviously being a huge one in the fantasy community now for playing Dynasty. But you can input all of your Sleeper leagues, and the trade calculator works exactly how your league settings work. It goes through, values your players based on your settings, and helps you kind of identify some of the better trades within your leagues that you can make to, tier up, tier down, whatever it may be. Really great tool. And obviously the film room scouting season is top notch. It's tier 1. Once again, dynastynerds.com, use promo code Club Fantasy, save yourself 15%. All right. That about wraps it up this week. Oh, so much good stuff. Love this. And you know what? We're getting 3 more really, really good teams next week. We've got what do we got next week? Off the top of my head. I know the Lions, the Bills, and the Ravens next week we're talking. So 3 more really good teams. Some good, quarterbacks there. That Lions team is going to be a lot of fun to talk about. Let me tell you. Can't wait for that one. But be sure to, if you're watching over on Twitter, the link to YouTube is literally right there in the tweet. So just pop on over, hit that like, hit that subscribe. It's 100% free to show us some support. We're on the doorstep of 1,100 YouTube subscribers, making our way up to 1,500 and 2,000 as we try to grow this page out. Show us some support. We've got 9 shows every single week that we're doing. We're live literally every day, guys and girls. Like it's so much content, and we're gearing up for Women of Fantasy Football Month in August. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're raffling off some jerseys, raising some money for our WAF Galvanized Scholarship. So once again, there you go. Joel won that Jonathan Taylor jersey last year. Lot of really good stuff. We're building out the guest list now and stockpiling the jerseys that we're going to be raffling off. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So be sure you're following Club Fantasy at Club Fantasy FFL and Women of Fantasy. That's women at women of _FF. on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Club Fantasy is all over the place. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. Follow myself at the One Hudsonian. Follow Joel at the Joel Wirth. And always remember, Dynasty is like a disco ball. Keeps on spinning year round. So join the club every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern right here on Club Fantasy. We'll see everybody next week for the Bills, the Lions, and the Ravens for another Dynasty preview, a look inside. Peace out all.
Thanks, everybody.